Now, we both know that there's been a lot of buzz about this new attractions update, the fresh looks for the Country Bears. You just mentioned Romeo. But do you know the original story of how the Bears came to be part of Disney's lineup?
I would say kind of at
Mm.
best. Like, weren't they originally supposed to be at a ski resort that Walt Disney wanted to build?
That is true. In fact, I think it was your husband Eric who noted that in the script for the new show, again, the Country Bear Musical Jamboree, there's actually a nod to this project. Henry, the show's MC, as he's introducing Ernest, that's the bear who fiddles supercalifragilisticexpialidocious so fast that his instrument starts smoking. Anyway, Henry mentions that as part of Ernest's intro that he used to play with the Mineral Kings.
Yes, yes, and that's where this Disney designed ski resort that was originally supposed to be built, that's where that came from, right? Mineral King?
Yep, yep, yep. And this was supposed to be built in the technical term is a subalpine glacial valley in the southern portion of Sequoia National Forest. Now, important to note here that back in the early 1960s, it was the National Forest Service that decided that it wanted to develop this corner of what was then Sequoia National Forest, not Sequoia National Park. And that Disney was the company that the U.S. Forest Service selected to then develop this remote piece of real estate.
Okay, and wasn't the plan to build a self-contained alpine village like right there in the glacial valley where vacationers they could, stay, they can come during the winter months, ski down Mineral Hill slopes, something like that?
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that was the plan, and originally, if you look at the press accounts from '65, this project was going to cost $35 million to build, but it was going to be a year-round resort. It was going to have a chapel, a conference center, 10 restaurants, and its very own ice rink, plus lots of places for people to stay when they came to ski, or if they came during the summer months, they could then hike the trails in and around Mineral King and then take in the truly spectacular views.
Wow, I didn't realize it was such a big project. I thought it was something that maybe Walt was just dreaming up. So it's a big, it was had big plans. Where do the bears come in?
Well, okay, so the thinking was after a full day of skiing, people were going to come back to Mineral King's main lodge and want to relax. And as they sat there in this public space, that they should be entertained by something. Now, where this gets interesting is on a parallel track in Imagineering, because you got to remember this is December of '65. Work is already gotten underway on the version of It's a Small World that was going to open at Disneyland Park in just 6 short months, and May 28th, 1966 to be exact. But what was going to make this version of Small World different than the one that had been built in Flushing Meadow as part of the 1964 New York World's Fair was the elaborate clockwork in its facade that chimes every 15 minutes.
Oh, I know that. That's where all the little kids march out
There
as
you
the
go.
small world theme starts to play. Like, I totally know that. And, I remember seeing that when Eric and I took the kiddos to Disneyland last October. So let me guess here, though. Walt wanted something like this in the main lobby. Is this where you're heading with it? He wanted something
Yeah.
like this in the main lobby at Mineral King, some sort of like clock that would go off every 15 minutes. Only instead of little kids marching, it was supposed to be bears.
Yeah. Now, that was the idea that Walt supposedly started with, or so said Marc Davis. I was lucky enough, Lauren, to get to visit Mark in his home in Las Feliz. That's where this Disney legend lived with his equally talented bride. In fact, what was kind of interesting is they were literally just up the hill from where Disney's first studio was, the Hyperion Studios. But again, this visit would have been in the early '90s. And over the course of that visit, Mark was kind enough to show me all sorts of concept art for the Bear Band show.
So, when did the project go from like being this elaborate bear themed clock to something where there would be animatronic bears that did a show?
Well, all right, as Mark explained it to me, this was typically the way Walt worked. That initially there'd be a simple idea, relatively simple. It's like, again, in this case, it's a bear themed clock, that, just like the one that was being built at this very same time for Disneyland's version of It's a Small World. But then after that first meeting, Walt would go off and think for a bit. And then at the next meeting on the same project, he'd say something like, I think we should go bigger. Could this maybe be a show instead? And also worth noting, Lauren, there was precedent. I mean, think about it. The Enchanted Tiki Room, animatronic show featuring animals and music that had opened at Disneyland in June of 1963. So it's not really all that big a jump to get to a bear show.
Right. So, but this is the part when the bear clock becomes the bear show because Walt said, make it bigger, make it better.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing. Okay, so you got to remember, Mineral King is supposed to be an alpine themed ski resort. So Mark's first pass on a bear band show has all of these bears in lederhosen, and they're and they're wearing those hats you see people wear when they go to Oktoberfest. The one with the little feather on the side. So
Yeah, I do. I know exactly the hats, like beer garden style at
there we
Epcot.
go. There we go. All right.
Okay, but I mean, that sounds like it'd be a fun show to watch, like only if. But instead of playing country music, they would be a bunch of bears, yodeling or
No,
the.
no, this is again an oompa band. Yes, no, you're right. And Mark showed me a drawing of a bear playing a tuba with these big inflated cheeks that's dressed in a lederhosen and again wearing the beer garden hat. And Mark said when he showed this drawing to Walt, he just laughed and laughed. He was very, very enthusiastic about this version of the Bear Band show. Now, what makes this story a little melancholy is Mark showed this to Walt on the very last time he ever met with Walt. Nobody knew. Nobody knew. This is November of 1966. He'd just come out of the hospital after what everybody was being told was, operation for polo injury. But this is when they took out most of his cancerous lung, and they effectively told Lily he's got a year, and then we lost him in 3 weeks. But anyway, so but again, he comes into to Mark's office, and Mark shows him all these bear band things, and Walt just laughs and laughs. And what Walt would typically do is like, okay, well, that's good, all right, and he'd walk out of your office, and it'd be done. But he said for the first time ever, Walt turned to him and said, goodbye, Mark. And it was just sort of sat there, and Mark sat there, and it's like, because he could also see that, he just looked sick. He was yellow, and it was like he went home and told, Alice he's a dead man, and but that's the thing, you know, but this was Walt's last laugh.
I mean, how did we get to it being country bears?
Well, okay. So first and foremost, after we lose Walt in December of '66, organizations like the Sierra Club reach out to the state of California and the U.S. Forest Service, and they voice their opposition to developing even a remote corner of a Sequoia National Forest. And over time, that derailed the project.
But the bears live on, right?
They do. But again, largely because, Mark shared this story about Walt loved this. Walt, Walt really laughed at this. We need to do this.
So, how did we get from the Oompa band to country music?
Well, okay. So there were a number of stops along the way. Mark showed me concept art for a bear band where all of the animatronic players would have been playing brass instruments and worn, bright red uniforms and hats with plumes like the Disneyland marching band used to wear. Mark also dreamed up versions of this show where, again, you're out of a ski area, so you got to figure out what are the bears doing. So now the Bears are playing ragtime or they're playing Dixieland. He tries all of these different musical styles.
Only to land on country music because.
Well, this part of the story. All right, I'm serious. This is what Mark told me exactly. That first of all, part of this was largely by default because think about it. Adventureland at the Magic Kingdom in Florida already had it, slotted its own sit-down animatronic show, the Sunshine Pavilion, aka the Enchanted Tiki Room. Fantasyland at the Magic Kingdom of Florida also had its own sit-down animatronic show, the Mickey Mouse Review. And Liberty Square, Hall of Presidents, Tomorrowland would eventually have two sit-down shows with animatronics of Flight to the Moon and Carousel of Progress.
And that just leaves Main Street USA and Frontierland at Florida's Magic Kingdom. Those were really, it sounds like, the only two parts of the park that didn't already have a sit down animatronic show, either then or planned.
Well, now this is where it gets so interesting because you mentioned earlier in the show today that you and the family went to have dinner at Tony's Town Square restaurant. Well, right next to, in fact, just past where you saw the $15,000 painting from Tiana's Bayou Adventure, right next to that, where they now do the meet and greet with Mickey,
Yeah.
there used to be a theater complex. In fact, this is where you used to go to see the Walt Disney Story. This was a film that the company put together. I want to say it started running in like 73, with the notion of let's tell you about the guy who, this resort is named after. But again, for a time they considered, well, what if we did the bear show, the brass band or the rag one or something like that in this theater space right there on Main Street.
But that didn't get built. So why did we end up with the Country Bear Jamboree in Frontierland?
Okay, now this is the part of the story I know that people will probably have a hard time with, but I swear to God, I got this straight from Marc Davis. All right, so if and you can go on Google and do this right now. If you look at the top rated TV shows from the 1968 to 1969 television season, and by the way, that is the time period where WDI is working with Disney's board of directors and they're locking down exactly what they're going to build in Florida as part of the Walt Disney World project. Anyway, Lauren, many of the most popular shows during this era in television were sitcoms that were either set in rural settings or prominently featured comical characters from the country. So we're talking about shows like The Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, Gomer Pyle USMC, and Mayberry RFD.
Oh my gosh, it makes so much sense now. Finally, I guess I never really gave it that much thought, but I'm assuming that that's how we wound up with the country themed bear show,
We
right? Like
did.
it was popular for the time.
Well, but the interesting thing is that Mark had a front seat for this entire design process. In fact, he talked a lot about, that was the thing when you work with Walt Disney. Walt liked it when you walked into a meeting with a bunch of ideas. In fact, there's a famous story about an Imagineer who once walked into Walt's office with a single piece of concept art and had a pitch for an attraction and finished the pitch and and pointed to the concept painting for the attraction and said, "What do you think?" And Walt reportedly said, "Well, it's hard to choose between one." I mean, so So what Mark would do again, Mark would come in like with a set of drawings, and like again, Walt looked at the wall, and here was this whole series of bear drawings and different styles, and there was that bear in lederhosen playing the tuba, and it's like, that's funny, that's what I want to do. So but anyway, again, got the story straight from Mark, and again, let's not forget that, get right down to it, Frontierland still needed a sit down animatronic show of its own. So,
Well, that was a heck of a story, and now it makes so much sense as we got, our new all grown up bears. And I mean, I think it's only proper that we know where they came from.